When I first started out coaching, one of my main focuses was to work with third culture kids, which I personally like to call third culture people because most of the people I worked with are grown. And so I feel it's a little outdated. But I am excited to share and talk about it and why I started working with this group of beings is because I am also a third culture kid, TCK. Now, if you have never heard that term before, then it means somebody who comes from split culture, who has grown up in several different locations, different cultural locations. And so I grew up bouncing around the world in different countries. My father is from the Caribbean, my mother is from Canada, and my stepfather is from Belgium. And we grew up in many, many schools in many different places and languages from the age of 8 when I left. And so that is a possible explanation or a possible uh, example of third culture kids, but it can have, people could have bounced around more than me or a little bit less than me, may not have three parents or more parents, perhaps. And so then there's no definite definition, but there was a group of people who, started to grow and move and migrate around the world. And this group continued bouncing. And it's a lot more common nowadays than when I was younger. Nowadays, you've got, expats who are being sent around the world. And before, when I was growing up, it was either kind of like you were an army kid, which I was not. My stepfather was a pilot. And so because of recessions and because of airlines, dying, then we had to move to different countries because most countries don't have more than one airline. And so that is a little bit of my story, and the reason why I want to really talk about it is because I've worked with so many third culture kids and I've been around third culture kids. And there are things that I learned on my journey that I find that I share a lot and that I hear people who have grown up with similar experiences sharing a lot. And so this is really my personal exploration and what I got out of it, my lessons in life. It doesn't need to be everybody who is a third culture person. Same story. It's not going to be their story. But perhaps it may resonate with you if you are a third culture kid. Now, one of the top things is that I learned how to be easily adaptable. Now, this is different from an expat who chooses to leave their home country and to move as a grown person. When you are a kid, you don't have a choice. You don't have much of a say in the matter if one of your parents gets a job somewhere else and that you have to uproot yourself and find yourself in a country that perhaps is completely the opposite, culturally speaking. Perhaps it's a completely different language, different systems, different everything. Now, anyone who has moved country knows that whether you choose it or not, there's a lot of adaptation. There's a lot that you have to relearn and redo. Now, when you're a kid and you don't choose to do that, what you do choose when you're bouncing around and you spend a little bit of time here and a little bit of time there and you're going from school to school to school is that somewhere you learn to adapt. Now, it doesn't always mean that you learn healthy strategies on adapting. But what I have noticed is that most third culture people, myself included, know how to you get to a point where you know how to find that space where you fit in. And the reason I call it a double-edged knife is if you fit in by going completely against yourself, or if you fit in really listening and learning how to come to your center and move from your values. And that's a learning process for everyone. What I learned was that in some areas of my life, I could just make it happen. I could start in a new company and find my way in there, find my way in different jobs that perhaps I wasn't even interested in, and learn how to excel within those spaces and then bounce around, move on. That adaptability then worked for me in a certain way, but in another way, I also had to learn to face, just like so many others, I had to learn to face how to bring it more to my core, how to really learn to listen to what my values were within there and if it was resonating in the spaces that I was adapting to. So it is a skill to be able to adapt easily, but then also to start bringing your voice into that, your own color into that. And often when I'm coaching third culture people, it's almost like the opposite direction of choice. Most third culture people understand that there are, endless possibilities. And so, how to make a choice that resonates with you within all of those possibilities. Whereas with a lot of people who are not third culture, and it doesn't mean to say that all people are like this, but most of the time in coaching, you're opening paradigms and opening possibilities. And it's the other way around. It's like, okay, yes, you can do anything. And it is possible for you to probably go in any direction and find your way, because that is what you've been trained to do by getting picked up and plopped in another place and plopped in another place. You built strategies on how to function like that, whether they were making you happy or not. And this is the question, is like, how do you find happiness within that? How do you create space for yourself and your voice in those choices and that possibility, no matter how enticing it may be to you? It could be that you're also repulsed by the idea of all those possibilities, but you still function like that anyway. So how do you narrow it down in line with your core values? The second thing I learned, or the second thing, or one of many things that I learned, another thing that I learned was in making friends, that I learned, and this is really personally my own journey, and I rarely meet people who really trusted this at a young age, but I learned how to really listen to and trust that voice inside on whether I would connect with someone. And I often used to call it a pickiness, like I'm really picky about my people, and I am, but I also learned along the way that everybody's picky about their people, except they're not always in tune with that inner voice. And so they allow so many more people in than maybe is right for them, or maybe that they actually desire, but they're searching for it and they don't have that inner connection of voice. And that's one thing that I really learned from a young age, on how to listen to that voice, on how to really follow through an action from that space, which is not easy when you keep switching schools, because we all want to, and it's from a young age, it's not even in my late teens or something, it's from a really young age, like how to make the connections that are true to you, and make friends that are true to you, and how to not just make friends for because I have to make friends and I have to make life, because we all want that. We all want a sense of belonging and to find ourselves somewhere reflected within our environment. And so it also comes with a, at least in my life, with a side of loneliness as well. And that is something I've learned to be with in a different way. Not to say that I feel really alone, but also, yeah, like be with the fact that, yeah, my people are spread out around the world. And that means that, physically speaking, and I've spoken about this before, they're not all present for me to just, go knock on their door, and vice versa. And so it's planning in how to make those connections. But when I step into an environment, I wait for that signal from within. And if it doesn't happen, it's all right. And if it does, then it does. And that means I have this like collection of people from all these different areas of my life. And I have all these different kind of communities that I kind of like enter into and leave, and enter into and leave. And I don't have like one community that I stick with. And then I have my people, my hand picked people from all of those different areas that form my community. And that's something that I really learned from that time, that I learned to trust from that time. And I really value that part. Like I really cherish that part inside of myself that I trust. And so that's something that I learned. Another point is not to take everything as truth, because cultures and countries and languages are so subjective with what truth is. Then I learned that what is right in one culture may be completely frowned upon in another culture, and that they think something else is really right. And so there's this kind of like judgment that happens when, like, this is how you sit, this is how you behave, this is how you speak over here. And then you go somewhere else, and this is how you hold your knife and fork, and this is how you do hand gestures, and the volume that you speak at, that is okay for over here. And both sides might find the other rude or too, like, intrusive. It's also like personal space is different in every single area. So the truth of anything, anybody's reality is completely different. It depends on, which eyes you're looking through. And because my parents already come from three different like cultures completely, then I had this in my, in my close bubble, like my tight bubble, my world, but I also experienced it like with the external world, and the friends and the people and the schools and the systems that we lived in, the communities that we lived within, and how that's reflected. So that truth, there's not like one truth to anything. And it was really confusing at first growing up, and that not everybody functioned as well in my family. Like my siblings didn't always like interpret that part, and myself included, like didn't always interpret that part as really a learning aspect until perhaps later, like a lot later. And so it's, yeah, it was it was something that gave me the foundation to be able to really sit and hold space for my clients, for the groups that I hold space for and guide through themselves, a space of non-judgment. Because what do I know about what their truth actually looks like, and why it's built the way it is through their own filters and experience of life? And so it supported me so much in being able to step into the roles. And it is the journey of like what made this life, this part of my life, possible. Connected to that is not interpreting things as quickly. So not interpreting, it's slightly different, but it's also the same, like not interpreting someone's gesture or breath or smile or non-smile to be whatever your head imagines it to be. Because what I've witnessed in my life and what I've experienced in my life is that these things are so nuanced throughout the world. So, what they may say in one part of the world or in one family or in one community on a head nod or a type of sound that one would make or a hand gesture means something else completely somewhere else. So, not interpreting all of the body language and the psychogeographical movements that we make as we talk, and to try and take it all as information and to learn how to question from there. If you're interested, you don't have to question everything all the time, but noticing where you are getting caught up in your head of analyzing through a filter, whatever that is, and taking a neutral stance and looking at someone from a different space instead of coloring their world in for them. This again is something that's been super helpful for me in, the world of bodies that I live in reading bodies and working with bodies and watching bodies move in their dance and their intuitive movements and in their emotional release, all of those things, and watching that it is so nuanced. And if you can throw all that extra like filtered information away, it's so clear, and you're not judging again, you're not interpreting or placing something on top of. You can see, hear, feel someone for what they are in the moment. Another point is that I've noticed I've been able to ground inside of myself in a way of really feeling myself as home instead of linking it to all of the different locations that I grew up in or that I visit or that I where I've absorbed different aspects of myself, which have colored me in many different ways and have influenced me in many different ways. But what I mean is that really finding that home inside of myself, and also nowhere, because I don't feel like any particular country is home. And at the same time, there are a few places that I'm local to where I do feel a lot more at ease and there's a flow of life, but that, I'm not considered to be local because I've not been there the whole time. And so it's where we resonate, and that can leave a lot of expats that I've worked with feeling very confused and uneased and ungrounded because they can't seem to find their home when they come back to their home country, their homeland. Then they feel like, no, I'm not connected here anymore, I'm not the same person, this is not the space for me, and I want something else. And then they go to that other place, but it's also not that. And so there's like a lot of a search of finding where home is. And what I've found for myself, at least, is having a space inside of myself to call home, which was a journey as well. But to call home has been so relaxing. And I feel I got there quicker because I had all of that bouncing around experience at a younger age. So I was able to recognize that every country has its plus and minus points. Every country has its pros and cons. And that with that information, it's what you want and what you're willing to tolerate. So, what you want to live with, whether that's more nature, to be in a city or in the countryside, and the type of temperature, the type of cultures, the type of whatever your criteria is, and freedom, like all the things that it could be, and what you're willing to tolerate. Because every country has its cons as well. And so if those cons cloud out what it is that you're there for, then it doesn't balance out. And there is no ideal place. The ideal place is to recognize that that happens everywhere. And so, what are you willing to tolerate in order to have what it is that you want? And that's something that yeah, that I feel that I've really learned in bringing that home feeling inside of myself makes it a lot more settled and grounded. It feels that I'm able to then be in a space where I can, you know, be with my choices and also reflect on, what it is that I chose in the first place. Because we all get pulled. We all get pulled into different directions, and also like, why? Why did I end up here? Why did I choose this country? Because of, all of these cons that could happen. And I could sit around complaining about them all. But then if I come back and I recognize, like, what is it that I chose actually, and that I wanted for myself, and how that balances out with those cons. And it settles me, and also my feeling of home, because no matter where I go, there's different aspects that come up. We are like all so complex as beings that, what I miss here in the Netherlands, for example, is nature. I miss nature. I miss like raw nature. And what I do know is that I'm able to leave here very easily. Like, I don't have to go far. And there are other reasons that have me staying here. And there's, cultural aspects, there's all different kinds of things. But for my value system, at least for this moment in my life, and for the time that I've been here, which is a long time, then it has I have found that grounding inside of myself where I'm not searching. Because when I have searched, then I'm like an outsider everywhere, because I haven't been there the whole time. And so no matter where I go, even like my accent is nowhere. It's not a like, if I'm in Canada, people here feel that I sound more North American. And when I'm there, they think I sound more European, and not British, but more European. And so, like, where do you actually come from? So all of those different nuances, and then that have you getting pulled in different directions if you're a third culture person, and to then bring it back in to find that home inside of yourself. Another point, and this is not necessarily something that I learned per se, but it is more when you are a small family unit that bounces around the world, then as a child, of course, you get bounced around into different schools, and you have to make friends, and you have to create, a little world for yourself. But your parents are also in the same process. And so they don't have the same support systems as they may have had back in their homeland. And then, because of the nature of a third culture kids unique set of circumstances, is that they don't just migrate to one place and then establish those kind of connections. They continue to bounce on and on and on and on, which also means that for the parents, that they are having to research and find community and to create all of that as well, over and over and over again. And that creates actually this like bubble, this pressure cooker of a family unit, because you mainly have each other. And if there's anything that starts boiling, and it can be just like normal family, processes and dynamics. But if there's extra on top of that, then it's very intense. And for me, my family was already very intense, but I didn't have that perspective of this pressure cooker that was bouncing around the whole time. So, my parents were also trying to figure it out, and not having resources as well to be able to figure it all out. And so that in itself created an even tighter, like more intense, like dynamic that really forced me at some point to create very clear boundaries. because boundaries weren't as strong because of that pressure cooker. You only had each other. And so there was a different dynamic on creating safety, a different reliance on each other and on the children. And the safety and the freedom and the actual boundary setting and emotional health was like, it was only at a later date that I could look back and really feel like compassion for every single one of us that was in that bubble, but at the same time, really make strong boundaries and to switch up my pattern of going beyond myself in order to create safety for others and to find my voice within that. And so it is something to just pay attention to for yourself. If you are a third culture kid, understanding that bubble or that you've been through and how that reflects in your day-to-day life now, like what have you figured out from it, or perhaps it's the first time you're thinking about it like that. And so what arises inside of you on things that you want to explore further for yourself for your own healing. And another thing that I want to share is that I've often, like when you tell your story and that you've grown up in all of these different places, then there are two kinds of responses. The first is usually like, wow, like what was that like? What was that like to, bounce around the world, and like what a fantastic opportunity. And on one hand, yes, absolutely, but it's also responding to an adult. Now, a child, of course, growing up in different cultures is a beautiful experience, but it is also very challenging. And of course, children are easily adaptable, but it's also understanding who your child is. I grew up with two other siblings in this bubble, moving around the world, and each of us had a different way of responding to it. And so there's not one way. And whatever you think as an adult or a grown person about the experience of another, understand that it's also, there's a lot of challenges with it. So no matter how much I really feel the beauty of it, it also comes with a flip side. And I also don't know another way of being. And that's usually my response. I don't know what it's like to stay in one town or city for my entire schooling, or in one school for my entire secondary school or primary school. I don't know what that's like. And so yeah, like I don't have a comparison. I have people that I can compare it to, but I wasn't with them and I didn't have their experience. And so it's just, one life compared to another life. Now, another response is like, whoa, that must have been super challenging. And yeah, it was challenging. It was challenging to be a child growing up in those different spaces, but it was also like fascinating in my eyes, highly overstimulating, but fascinating. And I'm a curious person, so it fed that part of myself. And so I hope to have shared a little bit of this exploration of third culture life, living, lessons, what it is to be a third culture person, or if you have any in your life, maybe it's something to just reflect about. And if it's the first time you've ever heard about any of this, I'm curious to hear from you as well, and like what you take from this. One love. I'll see you next time.